Hi, and welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, a show on science and faith that addresses questions posed by skeptics, Christians and non Christians, people who are struggling to reconcile science and faith, for those who are deconstructing or reconstructing or just rearranging what they believe. Bring various voices and conversations to open paths for those who wandered to connect with Jesus along their journey. If you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube, please drop us a note in the chat boxes and we will keep an eye out for your comments and questions. Today we have Tony Reed, who was born and raised in San Diego, California. In 1999, he was awarded a doctorate in divinity with an emphasis on apologetics, along with ordination as a reverend. It was the study of apologetics that led him to investigating science. Although he never was a young earth creationist, he did encounter a great deal of young earth argumentation, which was doing more to drive people away from the faith than anything an atheist could ever do. This caused him to deep dive into the science that young earth creationism seeks to discredit, finding that the young earth arguments were all either misrepresentations or exaggerations of the published science. More concerning was the fact that the adherents of creationism had no interest in correcting their pseudo-scientific views. This led to a show, How Creationism Taught Me Real Science, which was designed to appeal to young earth creationists by accurately presenting their arguments and then systematically correcting them by citing published, peer-reviewed science. This show is now at 104 episodes, and after a year hiatus is posed to return to address more faulty creationist arguments. Recently, he has also launched a new series, Read Between the Lines, designed to find the common ground between opposing views, such as gun control, abortion, and the vast spectrum of political ideologies. Welcome, Tony. It's so great to have you on your show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I'm definitely a fan of your series, How Creationism Taught Me Science. I especially in the areas kind of a little bit outside of my own expertise, I guess. I love just kind of dropping in and watching one of your episodes and like, oh, okay, I didn't really quite understand that before. So now I know better, and now I know what's wrong with that argument, or know a little bit more about this or that. So I've really come to appreciate your series. And wow, I just think what a lot of effort and research you've done to put those episodes together.
Thank you. I do put a lot of research into them. There's things that people have asked me to cover, even in the first series, that I haven't quite done enough research with to address yet. And so there's plenty of stuff that I'm still going over, trying to figure out what kind of a science there is. Strangely enough, it is actually definitely difficult to get access to a lot of the primary sources. And I'm doing a pretty good job, I think, of doing that and getting to the sources, and hopefully I enlighten a few people without ruffling too many feathers.
Speaking of ruffled feathers, I came across someone this week as I was sharing about your interview coming up and about your series, and they just couldn't read accurately and kept misunderstanding. It was I think there are just some people that you have biases, right? And they've already made up their mind, and it's difficult to even get somebody to listen if they have such strong feelings that they shut off their ears. So
Well, yeah, I mean, I experienced that. I experienced that a lot. But it's not just from it's just not creationism, and I think you're pointing out this was not a young Earth creationist. This is probably somebody who accepted evolution, possibly even been an atheist. But I get that all the time, and sometimes I'll even get it from somebody who criticized me once, and I'll explain it to them, and they'll think, "Oh, okay, great," and then they'll come back 6 months later, having completely forgotten about me, and then make almost the same comment. People are what they are.
Yeah,
They
yeah. No,
keep
I mean,
what they keep.
it's people, right? So I've seen it across the spectrum. It's not just one side or the other, or I'm not even sure that we should call it sides because there's a range or a gradient of viewpoints. But but people just are people, and I mean, most people kind of think that they're right. Hopefully, people think they're right, but hold their beliefs tentatively and are willing to change with evidence. But not everybody is. Um, so, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself for our guests? I mean, you have a really interesting bio, but tell us like a little bit about your spiritual and educational background, and what was of interest in pursuing divinity school.
Well, there's a lot that I'm going to have to leave out, obviously, but my educational background is in chemistry and economics. I majored in that when I was at Grossmont College in El Cajon, California, and I left early to get into the nightclub business. I ran about a dozen nightclubs through San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Houston, Dallas, Miami. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but I had a lot of fun in that industry, but it was a vapid sort of fun. And I found myself on a more inner path, and that led me to studying scripture, and that began a journey of me, um, just one thing leading to another. And I ended up deciding, I met my girlfriend who I was going to marry. I decided, which was an interesting thing for her to support, getting my doctorate degree from the ULC seminary in Modesto, California. And I found out quickly that working with a church or even any kind of 501c3 tax exempt nonprofit comes with aggravations that just aren't there when you're running a typical for-profit business. I'm a horrible collaborator. Even today, there are other YouTubers, and they've asked me to collaborate, and I've wanted to collaborate them, but I'm somewhat of a control freak. So with a church, you have to face a board, and nothing gets done very quickly. It's very frustrating to me. So I segued out of that rather quickly. From there, I started a children's entertainment business, doing shows, particularly for corporate events. I even had a contract with the San Diego Chargers, and I decided I'd try to make some kind of contribution to apologetics on the side. But from there came a decade-long rethinking of my life. I was engaged in debates online, sort of ran across the evolution creationism debate online. And particularly, it was through Kent Hovind that I was made aware that there was even a debate, but that there was a point that I became aware of how heated it could be, and so it fascinated me, and so I decided to take the time to go through every single argument in his seminar series. And at the time, he was filming his lectures in churches with live audiences, and it was interesting that his slides always had references on them, like direct links to the source material. And if you're in the audience and you're pre-cell phone era, you have no way to check those references. But I was watching them on YouTube, so I was able to fact check them instantly. And that, of course, that entire going through that entire seminar led to the show that became How Creationism Taught Me Real Science. Kind of what brought us here today.
We are on with Tony Reed from How Creationism Taught Me Real Science, and we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So, to our viewers, if you'd like to ask a question or make a statement, feel free on either of those venues. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You just made kind of an interesting comment. There's a lot there. I mean, with your business background and in entertainment and so forth, and then you said you were led to apologetics, and I'm just wondering, what was it? Watching the Kent Hovind tapes that I know that led you into your study of science, but what was it about apologetics? What drew you to want to defend the faith?
Actually, this was way before the whole Kent Hovind thing. I wasn't even aware. Strangely enough, I wasn't even aware of him. There was a period of time where, um, I mean, through college, and there's a group of people called the International Churches of Christ. I don't believe they're still around, or if they are, they've renamed themselves. They were led by a particular individual by the name of Kip McKean, and he was very aggressive on the college level, very, very aggressive. And I guess he eventually was removed from that. But that the campaign that he started of apologetics on college campuses was very effective. It reached out to young people that were in college, questioning themselves, questioning their beliefs, and it brought a lot into the church. But yeah, there's some negative things about it that just didn't jive with me, and so it's not that it drove me away, but it was there for me to think about as the next phase of my life went on. Everything that I was doing, running clubs and things like that, was also my opinion of it was informed by that education that I got. And I'm not saying that it was a bad education, but when you're redefining terms, I don't want to go too much into that particular church, because I believe they reformed everything that Kip McKean put into place. But if you're not familiar with it, I don't want to go into too much detail. But that was really the beginning of it. It made me question a lot of what I was doing in my life anyway, and it finally overtook what I was doing in my life.
So the chapter that went from Kent Hovind to you starting your own YouTube channel where you discuss science, was there inner turmoil in that, or there was something about Hovind that made you skeptical to follow up on his claims? Were you surprised by what you found out? Were you reluctant to accept that at all? Or did you kind of suspect that what Kent was saying just seemed off or shady?
I believed it was. I believed him. I didn't for a second question a lot of what he said, because it sounds reasonable. What had what happened is I'd gotten tired of not being able to have an informed opinion on things. And when somebody brings up a creation evolution debate, I would have probably opted out of participating and just listened. And so this was sometime I decided to go ahead and fact check it and see what it is, and actually not to disprove them, but basically to, one way or another, if it's if it's true, I'll go for it. If it's not true, I won't go for it. I'll go into more detail. What happened is I would find out that one thing was wrong. Maybe I couldn't really do much detail on another, and I went through a few other arguments, and I started to notice that the more verifiable that his claims that he presented were, the easier it was to fact check them. And there, almost every time, actually every single time, when I could verify the claim or what his conclusion was from the claim, it was almost never correct. Actually, it was never correct. I apologize. So it kind of went from there, and it was there was no, I'm going to disprove him once and for all. It was just, let's go through this. And then by the time it was over, I went through my entire body of work and went, I see a trend here.
Yeah. So, how did you go about fact checking him? I mean, you mentioned sometimes he had references or links to his source material, and so that was a good starting point. But what else did you do?
Well, in the process of doing that, you end up learning about things like peer-reviewed sources, which there's already a stigma that in some groups about that. But when you go through what his links are and how they link to other things, and they make claims that you may think are a little questionable, and you look them up and you find out that, oh, well, this is a peer-reviewed source, And I just happened to be living at the time when I started going through his stuff. I was living in Humboldt, California, which has there's a university there called Humboldt University, and I was able to access their university library and actually go to the sources. And it just happened that I happened to stumble across a lot of the sources he would represent, or he would put in his slides, and they didn't say what he said they did. And it was kind of a shock, because my first thought was, well, you're not going to win people over by lying. And the more because even then I was still willing to accept creationism, or young earth creationism, as an option, but I kept thinking, you're just not going to win people over with bad information. And that kind of just led me on the path I was on.
And pretty much you found out that it was all bad information, or everything that you've investigated so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, bad for the most part, bad information. Sometimes it's extrapolations or premature extrapolations, and again, I take a less aggressive view of the creationist, the young Earth creationist view. It's not that I have a problem with their beliefs, so to speak. I just have a problem with its intrusion on science, simply because, as you probably will go over, there's an application of science that I don't want to interrupt.
Right.
Tony, you're talking mostly about young Earth creationism right now. I'm wondering, as you started to see the weaknesses of some of their arguments, and you started to make content, kind of defending the science that would rebuke their points of view. What was your own personal path like? Did you move from young Earth creationism to old Earth creationism and ID, or were you simply in a place where you're saying these statements were wrong here? I'm going to focus on correcting that. What was your own path like personally, aside from the show?
Well, I wasn't really I wasn't a young Earth creationist. I was more. I guess I would have taken. Well, actually, I know what I would have taken. I'd formulated my own harmonization between Scripture and and the old Earth view that satisfied me. I didn't really. I don't think I ever would talk about it anymore, but I'd come up with my own view of it. But there came a point in time, as I was doing the investigation, that I just kind of I just it became pointless to really entertain the young Earth view, and I was trying to defend it in my head, just because I was trying to be skeptical, and it just overwhelmingly, every time I came to a young Earth view, there was not only a reasonably alternative explanation, but a predictive explanation that actually had some kind of real world application, that actually somebody used the predictions from that theory to find something that is benefiting us on a daily basis.
I'm wondering, and I'm going to give it back to Christine right after this question, but I'm wondering what's been the reaction toward how creationism taught me real science. I mean, has it changed since its inception? What was your feedback early on? And I'm wondering, maybe you can tell us, if the feedback is negative or positive overall, and what does it look like from people who are within the faith, and maybe even from people who are outside the faith responding to your channel?
That's actually, there's a lot to unpack in that, but the major, all right, the major effect, I did get a lot of comments immediately, and I remember one of the very first comments on it, even after the first episode, was, So are you a young earth creationist or not? Because I tried not to leave anything so definitive, but over time, number one, that has changed. There's pretty much a conclusion to be drawn at the end of every video. But then what happened, and this is perhaps the curse and the blessing of the show, is that somehow when I would talk about physics, a physicist would comment. If I talked about geology, a geologist would comment. If I talked about astronomy or if biology, genetics, they would comment. And suddenly I had to take my investigation to a deeper level. So you may notice if you watch the first few episodes, it's fairly light in terms of the what where I deep dive into. I give some detail, but it's nothing like my later episodes on information theory or intelligence. And so I guess in a way, the audience has expanded the depth that I go into my investigations. But then the other thing is, I mean, I can talk about the reactions people give, um, which is a different thing entirely. And that is, I've seen both people on both sides get very angry with me because of either the opening or the closing. If they tend to be creationists and they watch it, or young Earth creationists, they tend to watch it and then they'll at the end they'll be very angry with the results. But then there will also be people who advocate for evolution and old Earth that will watch the first minute of the episode and quickly turn off and then comment. So it's I'm sure there is a doctoral thesis to be made with data from my site somehow.
Yeah, I can see that. I can. The emotions rise, and then they stop listening, right? One way or the
Yeah.
other, either way. Yeah. Sounds fun. Maybe not. So okay, so after you went through Kent Hovind's lectures and looked at all his stuff, you've talked about not information theory and additional topics that are maybe not something that was from Kent Hovind. How did you come up with those ideas or those episodes?
Well, I mean, the show itself came up after about 10 years of contemplating what I wanted to do with my channel. I actually was one of the first people to sign up. When I first got my account, it was in 2004, which was, I guess, 3 months after YouTube had actually founded. So I initially started it to showcase my personal hobbies like music and stand-up comedy. And after spending a little bit of time debating with science online, I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to do a video that was an equivalent of the Talk Origins archive, but that ended up being impractical. And so I wanted I went through a few other concepts at the time, and I finally settled on this. On the creationism taught me real world science or real science. But for episodes, I tend to get my ideas from engaging in debates. I mean, you see me all the time in the Facebook groups. I do that partially just to express my opinion, but also to get research on what the latest arguments are. I am occasionally surprised. There are new ones, especially now. And so I get ideas also from commenters, and I also ask for suggestions at the end of each episode. So I guess the way I get to involved in an episode is just seeing how popular a new argument is. And sometimes I'll see one come out of nowhere and think this one's going to permeate everything. And like there's one I did on wave particle duality. I thought this was going to be a really big deal, and it ended up fizzling as an argument. So I've got this fun little episode that blows your mind, but ultimately is pointless because the argument never went anywhere to begin with.
Yeah, I like Joel Duff's This Week in Creationism, where he kind of highlights, kind of where the creationism groups are going or thinking. And ever watch his show?
I do.
They're a little
I
bit long
watch
and
it.
rambly, but yeah, but they're pretty interesting too. And He has such a gracious way of responding. I mean, you're gracious too, but it's a kind of a different approach. Gracious, but yeah, and his are just sort of long, and he explains all kinds of stuff. But I kind of like how succinct your videos are. I mean, they're really nice snippets that you can watch in like one sitting, and kind of individual topics. So if you're looking to explain something to on this thing, you can just go find this thing. Um, that's a real talent to make something really concise and explain a complicated topic to lay people in just a few minutes. How do you go about writing your scripts?
Oh gosh. I mean, I start with an argument, and then I'll look up the argument and look up the science around it, and then I'll half the time find other related arguments that are part of it, which is where it gets difficult, is deciding which arguments I'm going to address. And so I'll go through that. I'll use very, very terrestrial sources at first. Wikipedia. I'll even use Talk Origins, but I'll also use creation.com. I'll use, any source I can. In fact, when I think about it, actually, the Haeckel's embryos episode that I did, I couldn't find. It was so hard to find sources for the actual arguments, for the actual critiques, any of that about Haeckel's embryos. But then I think it was Dwayne Gish who posted something or published something, and it had the reference. And thankfully, I read the creationist sources because that gave me what I needed to go ahead and go through the Haeckel's embryos thing and go through all of the history of it. But it ends up just like that. And just to give you an idea, the Haeckel's embryos one I had been working on for 5 years or 4 years, something like that. And then all of a sudden, that one creationist source came up, and then that spider webbed in a whole bunch of research, and within a month I had an episode. So there's a lot of work involved. I'll also say I've done things like, for example, with the information theory one, I knew that was going to be the future of young Earth create. Well, in this case, it would be intelligent design argumentation, but either way, I realized that was where we were going in the argumentation, and so I went ahead and went to college and took some courses on information theory, and by the end of it, I've got my my episode on information theory, which actually ended up leading to 5 full episodes that went from just information theory itself to intelligence to specified complexity to biomolecules, and then even to the origin of life as part of information theory.
Yeah, that's
Tony,
really great.
do you think that bad science leads to bad theology, or do you think it's the other way around? In other words, creationism seems to be a feature of people of faith. And I'm just interested in why you think people walk down that path. Did they learn bad science growing up, or is it a particular way they're reading their holy scriptures, or they've been handed a worldview?
Well, let me start with the first part of it. I'll get into the worldview part. Bad science and bad theology. We may not agree on this, but my view on what's bad theology is if it's harmful to people. And not necessarily would I say bad science leads to bad theology in that sense. As far as how it affects the world around you, again, if you're a young Earth creationist, you're probably going to live a fantastic life. We have a fantastic society to grow up in. What is the issue is in the long run, every single creationist, young Earth creationist who refuses to address any of the evolutionary theory or in the Big Bang Theory, uniformitarianism, that is a potential person who could have possibly been someone who found a cure for cancer, solved an energy problem, and that's really, I mean, it's very, perhaps it's very improbable, but one of those people could possibly do it. So that's the only place where I would say it was bad theology. Why they do it, however, I would never get to a position where I would think I would know why people are doing things. It seems to me, I've debated Kent Hovind. It seems to me like, and other people disagree with me, but it seems to me like he honestly believes what he's saying. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just a very good actor, Oscar worthy, but I believe that he believes what he's saying. And is it's I don't know why. I do know that some people may find a profit motive in it. That's the other option, but I'm not going to accuse people of that. Especially when they really do seem to be passionate about their belief. I don't want to bother people about their belief. In fact, my show itself, it's not about disproving creationism so much as it is that this creationist argument is wrong. And try again. I have no problem entertaining a paper that says that it makes a prediction based on creationism, and then tests that prediction and shows that young Earth creationism is correct. I would love to read something like that. I generally see, in fact, not generally, I would say I always see papers that are reviews of other people's work. There's no prediction that is tested. It is just, this is what they have found, and this is it works with young Earth creationism, and that is, I mean, that's one of the things. It's explanatory. With creationism, you can explain a lot of things with it by assuming there's a creation or a creator, but it's about predicting. That's what makes it scientific. And so I don't want to presume to understand why people would become creationists or young Earth creationists. Just I just won't do that. But I do see that there is some harm to it in the long run.
Well, and would you say too that with the response of a certain demographic toward COVID vaccines, a correlation with young Earth creationism type of skepticism of science and scientists?
Yeah, I do see that, and we live in an information age that it's a frightening time. I mean, it's hard to determine where your information comes from and whether it's valuable. You may be led to believe that Reuters and the Associated Press are lying to you, and you may believe that the press is covering up things, and it's a world where there's a good reason to doubt information, and so I'm not making judgment. I can see why somebody would feel that the vast majority of scientists, over 95% of them who are working in every related field, are perhaps deceived, or perhaps the top ones are lying. I could see how that could happen. It seems a little irrational to me, especially since everything is peer reviewed, so you can check it for yourself. But I mean, what what kind of life do we have where we have to fact check everything we see, where we have to go through everything? So I see that as kind of a weakness in just our abilities as people. It's not
Mm-hmm.
that they're dumb as creationists, because they're not. They're very intelligent, and some of them, some of the young Earth creationists have actually invented some amazing things and made amazing contributions to science. It's just that particular place where they seem to have a predictive bias, and it's unfortunate, but it's not something I could judge people for.
I know you probably didn't mean to put that whole burden, Christine, on just young Earth creationists, because I actually think what you
Well, I said
described,
demographic. I didn't
yeah.
get that specific, but yes,
Well, I think
there's
what you
there is a
just
correlation with young Earth creationism, though.
No, I don't think it's just
Yeah,
young Earth creationism. I think it's
Not just,
creationism.
not just.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
there's plenty of ID people
yeah.
and old Earth creationists who have that attitude towards science, that skepticism. Is it just towards science, or is it as as you
And
kind
it's
of,
intertwined with politics. And
yeah,
there's, it's
well,
not
in
just younger
journalism
creationism.
and yeah.
It's more nuanced than that, more complicated than that. But yeah. So what
yeah.
kind of episodes? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, what kind of episodes have had the greatest interest or response, both negative and positive?
Okay. That one. Uh, Strangely enough, I was kind of disappointed about this at first, but when I first started paying attention to the viewership, it turned out that the first episode was not viewed much at all, and the one from the gate that was really got popular was in the first season. It was an episode on mitochondrial Eve, which I was actually quite proud of. So I was happy about that. But then something I felt bad about because I did the episode on Kent Hovind and the conspiracy against him, and I felt horrible about that one because it was more popular, and it I don't want a video. I would prefer that I was more known for a video that was enlightening rather than one that was attacking somebody. So if I could take one back, that would actually be one simply because it's about him personally. But it is a major creationist argument about how there's a conspiracy. The other ones that really kind of took off. Oh, yeah, I will also say that eventually that first one did overtake it. But the other ones that took off, there was one on hydroplate theory that was also my longest episode, and I it was 20 minutes. And after making that episode, I realized I don't ever want to make another 20-minute episode because it's hard. It's hard to pay attention. You were mentioning how I do short form videos, and that there was a reason for that from the beginning. So I felt like I had lost my way once I did that one. And so you'll notice that right after that, they came back down to 10 minutes or less. The other ones that are very successful are and that are always highly watched are the episodes at the end of every season where I talk about all the mistakes I made and everything I got wrong. And then I correct myself, and then I thank the people that actually corrected me and shout them out. That's actually my favorite episode to make every single season, and it thankfully gets a good response every year or every time I do it.
And that's just wonderful too. You had mentioned talk origins. Have you ever thought of taking all this? I mean, you've gathered so much research on so many different topics. The talk origins website is wonderful, but it's not being updated and maintained anymore. Have you ever thought about putting together a website and maybe taking some of that information and what you've researched and starting a database that could be beneficial for people?
Well, okay. At the time when I started my show, I was working because now I work in a completely different industry. I am now working. I work in the I guess you could say information technology now, but I was working dealing with online marketing and search engine optimization and how to really monetize information from people, how to segment information. And so the I the, at the time when I started the show, I was looking at uh, I, I kind of forgot where I was going. I apologize.
Hmm.
Making a
I mean,
website to update talk
oh
origins.
yeah, so yeah, that's what actually led me to um, starting to maybe thinking about doing a video version of the Talk Origins archive. But unfortunately, that just became impractical, and it became impractical because I started doing. I mean, even the very first episode was essentially going to be that, and I turned out that you really can't address one argument without addressing all of them in the sequence. So, if you're talking about the age of the moon, you may as well do an entire episode. I don't see myself taking over the Talk Origins archive or doing something like it. I might be a happy contributor to something like that. That would be fantastic because I could present my sources. And the Talk Origins, that is the most unfortunate part about it, is it's not updated. It hasn't been made into a wiki of some sort, so we can all correct it and update it. But it is, I mean, that's where I am on that.
Fair enough. I mean, I just
want
keep
to
hoping somebody will do that.
I want to circle back to the frying pan, because you mentioned that you didn't feel young Earth creationists are dumb people or not intellectuals. And I know there are, for example, some new atheists who would say they are absolutely dumb, whether it's Lawrence Krauss or Richard Dawkins. And I think their response would be they're offered information to correct their mistakes, and they don't respond to that information, and they believe crazy things. So I don't know how you define dumb, but I'd like to ask you this question: are we looking at it wrong when we talk about intelligence when it comes to this question? Because I know there are psychologists who would look at it and say, it's not intellectual at all. This is a volitional position. This is a willful position. It's an emotional position. And by offering them information and expecting them to change, we haven't really stood back and realized what's going on here. What is your opinion on the psychology of people who hold positions that are in the realm of pseudoscience, in the realm of conspiracy theories, that reject not just mainstream science, but the vast majority of opinion and expertise in those particular fields? Do you think it's an intellectual position, or is something else going on there?
Boy, I wish you could be talking to my wife right now. She's a psychologist. That's what she does. But she'd be better qualified to answer that question. But I hesitate to make a psychological evaluation, but it does. I mean, from my own, what I'll do is I'll empathize and give my reasoning why I would perhaps believe the way they did, or the way they do, and that would probably be because if something offers a threat to what makes me feel comfortable, I'm going to protect it jealously. I care about myself. I want to be happy, and I want others to be happy. I want the people I love to be happy. And if something seems to threaten my chance at that, I can't see myself wanting to let go of a belief simply for that. I don't think that is limited to young Earth creationism. I think that's also applicable to things like when you find out the person you're dating or something like that is perhaps a bad person, and you don't want to leave them for that because you want to believe that they aren't the person that they have represented themselves to be. Which now, unfortunately, I think I'm equating young Earth creationism with battered wife syndrome, and that is not what I'm trying to do. But it is something I have to keep in mind. But I can see that being a reason to maintain your beliefs in young Earth creationism. I can also see a desire to know more than the so-called experts. That makes sense to me. There's also, and I'm not saying this is a young Earth creationist thing. I'm not even saying that it's a UFO thing. But for some of the conspiracy theories that are out there, sometimes it's just a comforting thought to know that it's not your fault that all the things in your life have gone wrong. I'm not saying that's even a plurality of young Earth creationists, but I can see why holding on to certain beliefs could give you a comfort, and I can understand sticking with comfort.
I got one more question on this subject, and that is the matter of authority. You mentioned that you present authorities from even places like Wikipedia and so forth. But speaking from my own experience, when I was in a corner of belief that was very narrow and dichotomous and us versus them, and certain, I didn't accept authorities that I considered from a dark place or from an unenlightened place. You could share something from NPR or PBS or MSNBC or the New York Times, and I didn't accept it just because it wasn't an acceptable authority to me. I know I began to change really, and he probably shared the same information that Richard Dawkins would share, but I began to change when somebody on my team, Francis Collins, presented to me the evidence. So I'm just wondering, in that light, Tony, how do we overcome that kind of confirmation bias, which I think even you'd admit is really prevalent in this conversation, in that world?
Well, first of all, as far as Wikipedia goes, I do have to address that. I would never use that as the source. The reason why you can go to Wikipedia is just to get a general consensus of the of the argument, and then they'll also present sources, which is good. Thankfully, they require that. But there's a particular article on Wikipedia that literally states that Wikipedia is not a valid source. So I would never present that. But as far as the confirmation bias, and maybe that was an example of it, I apologize. But I try to take a different approach, especially now. I started initially by trying to argue with the show, I mean, about what the scientific consensus says and how they know it. Over time in my show, it has gone from not just how we know this, but how it was predicted and what we can do with it. So my argument nowadays, and I got a feeling Christine could probably tell you this, it's about real world applications. What can you do with your belief or what with this proposition? And who knows, maybe that is that may be a backward way to go. Maybe it's never going to go anywhere, but that's what I really care about is, I mean, if I've got to accept this as true, how is it going to benefit me in my daily life? I've got bills to pay. I've got people to take care of, and so with the common descent, with abiogenesis, with uniformitarianism, these are subjects that are predictive, and those predictions have real world applications that end up affecting us in our daily life. And there's got to be a point. I mean, if you're looking for an answer to everybody with their bias, that's just something you're going to have to live with because everybody has their own confirmation bias. Also, everybody has their own buttons that you can push to make them see the light. And unfortunately, that's going to happen on a one-on-one basis. There's not going to be a universal catch-all answer to that. You're just going to have to we're going to have to talk it out amongst ourselves.
Before I hand the baton
Actually,
back
I
to
really
my
like that.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you.
Before I hand the baton back to Christine, we do have a couple of comments from YouTube. This one is from Dr. Joel Duff, who says TO archive is horribly out of date, would have to be built from the ground up. I can't even remember the last time I looked at an article there. So thanks for sharing that, Dr. Duff. And then Dr. Van Gilder.
He would be a
also
great
chimes
person
in.
to update it to.
Most of the psychology behind conspiracy theory ideation is fear-based in-group identity. One's epistemic stance towards authority, persons, books, etc., is another huge factor, but I oversimplify that from Dr. Clark Van Gilder, who actually has a PhD in psychology. So thanks for chiming in on that, Clark.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah, almost certainly, actually is definitely better qualified for that question than I am.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I really like what you said about the predictions and how you can use it, because for me that was so I'm an aerospace engineer and do not have a strong biology background. Never learned about evolution. The only biology class I've ever had was in 10th grade at a Christian school that only taught young Earth creationism. Um, so I didn't know. Like I didn't know. I didn't even know how to know. I didn't know how to find out. And so one of the things that I do know though from my job making navigation systems for airplanes is it has to work, because if my navigation system doesn't work, planes crash, and then we won't have any customers. So customers need the product to work, and so the product has to work, and so the science has to work. And so there's something to be said about when you look at the biology and you see the implementations of it that work, that you can make these predictions, or you can develop these vaccines, or you can um, do medical treatments, or they work because the science works. And if if young earth creationism worked to do predictions that would get oil, or that would get us some kind of a navigation system in space to other solar systems, um, there would be a market for that that would make money, and companies would do that because my company could care less how old the earth is, or they're just out to make money for the shareholders. And one of the ways that we do that is have products that work and follow regulations so we don't get fines. So it was a big step to me to see how many different organizations with different funding goals and different like strategies, or like a university doing research would have a different funding source and need than, say, a corporate company that's just out to make products that make money, versus a nonprofit that's trying to do some good for the world. And when all of these sources are agreeing with different motivations, um, there's at least something to look at it in that. Might not always be entirely 100% accurate, but there's some commonality that's working. So I like that, the predictions and the testing it and the application. I think that's a good strategy.
I hope you're right. I actually, it's hard to understand. I'm in a lot of debates. So in these debates, I'll talk about the real world application, and maybe you've noticed this, but when I'm talking about the predictive power, they're assuming that I'm saying that evolution is true, that the Big Bang is true, that uniformitarianism is true, or or abiogenesis. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying whether or not they are true, they make predictions that have applications that are helpful to us, and that's you can make all the arguments that they're untrue, and still it belongs in science class because you can use it to actually make the world better. That's the whole point of science, is, or at least for me, the whole point of science is to predict the evidence and use it. Why else would you be predicting the evidence? It's the whole point of the scientific theory, is to predict the evidence. The only reason you would do that is because you have some agenda to use it for some reason. And that's exactly, pardon my whistle, by the way, that's also the reason why a lot of the funding for a lot, especially these genetic things, that these discoveries that are coming through genetics, they're funded by private companies. And the reason why is because they can patent whatever comes out of it and make a lot of money off of it. They're patenting reality. We can argue about the harm of that, but that is the reason why they are patenting it. Is it's because it's reality and they can use it in the real world.
There's another piece of science too, though. There's a piece that's encompassed by wonder, where this is just
Yes.
really cool and I want to know more. I mean, that's why my daughter, when she was 4, loved dinosaurs. They were just wondrous and fascinating, and
Mm.
there's just a kind of a pure piece of wonder and exploration that's part of science also.
And I
Um,
think that that's not that's not something that's not unknown in the young Earth creationist community. You see how much material from Answers in Genesis is flowered with dinosaurs. They have their explanations too, and this leads me into an area that I'd like to talk about, which is something that you haven't conceded yet, Tony, and that there is deceptive or manipulative pressure going on in some of these areas. Now, what you were just talking about, Christine, reminded me of the movie Merchants of Doubt, where we see just how much money from corporations goes into subterfuge and goes into absolute lying about the evidence, whether it be the harm from tobacco or climate science. We see a similar kind of an expression in Christian apologetics, and I want to come to that question in just a moment. But let me give you one more comment. Actually, this is a question from JS on YouTube. Why do old Earth creationists accept the secular findings of astronomy and geology, but not biology? I'll throw that open to you, Tony. And then maybe we could circle back to what I just mentioned.
Again, it's unfair for me to be asked to answer for somebody else's
Okay.
thoughts. I haven't also noticed that. I also have to say I haven't noticed that old Earth creationists reject that life evolved. I have seen, and I'm more than happy to be corrected on this, but what I have seen is that the old Earth creationist view seems to be that, yeah, evolution happened, but it was intelligently guided. And perhaps that's intelligent design, but it's not my job to define where those two
Yeah.
separate. But that is what I've gotten is people that haven't even, if I'm not mistaken, William Lane Craig accepts the fact that, or accepts that the planet is billions of years old, and that the life came from a common ancestor. He just happens to also think that an intelligent agent was behind it all.
Well, that's true of William Lane Craig. I've got to push back a little bit though on that
Okay.
statement as a whole because the big industry, old Earth creationists, whether it be RTB
Okay.
under Hugh Ross or the Intelligent Design Movement of Discovery Institute, there's a couple outliers like William Lane Craig that might accept evolution or might accept evolution up to Homo sapiens. But the vast majority of people in ID and old Earth creation are anti-evolution. So I do think that was a good question, but I understand your reticence to want to answer for other people. Christine, do you have any comment on that before we move forward?
Well, my experience in talking with people is that it's theologically based. What they believe the Bible said. It's related to kind of a scientific concordism in their approach to Scripture, and the type of resistance and arguments that are offered are pretty similar to what's offered by the young Earth creationist camp. Um, they typically deny the evidence, or they said there's no transitional fossils, or there wasn't enough time, or um, you know, God created everything specially, individually by kinds. However, I think they define kinds differently, um,
And the
but yeah, I
argument over
maybe
macro
there's
or
different
micro evolution, right?
macro. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's kind of that divide too.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna. I had I actually I had a debate with Kent Hovind, and as you probably know, he has redefined evolution as 6 different things, from the origin of the universe to the origin of planets, the origin of heavier elements, all the way down to macro and micro. I actually proposed to him in a debate that he adds a 7th one, which is geological evolution, which obviously would be uniformitarianism. But what I brought up then is that all of them, whether it's macroevolution, microevolution, or even the Big Bang Theory, they've all made testable, novel scientific predictions that have been confirmed via observation or perhaps even experimentation. And that's the thing about that. The differences is it's really just what they can predict. I will harp on that. Perhaps not today, but in most of the conversations I have, I like to emphasize that's what I'm talking about, is just the real world applications of what we can do with it.
So why do you think so many apologists take like an anti-evolution position, like the ID or the young Earth creationists, when so few biologists do?
Well, I mean, they're in a different world. I mean, their world. That's probably not the right way to say it, but I mean, they're exposed to different information. In apologetics, I mean, I can tell you this: in my time, we never really dealt with. We didn't really deal much with evolution, especially not going into the science of it. But the thing is, evolution perhaps can be perceived as a threat to your apologetics if you're trying to convince somebody that the Bible is true. And the very first book in the Bible says the earth was created in 6 to 7 days, depending on whether you consider the rest. I mean, I would accept that as part of my work week, but I don't. I get paid for my work week. The thing is, it's a 7. When you're faced with that, and then you hear these things about gradual stuff happening over millions of years, the 7-year idea of a creation event doesn't seem consistent with science, and that can be a road toward questioning. So, as an apologist, I would say the big thing about young Earth creationism is that it makes your job harder. Or at least having not young Earth creationism, but being trying to talk about young Earth creationism is to prevent your job from getting harder, because the evolutionary ideas preclude a 7-day creation or 6-day creation. They preclude a 6,000 roughly year old Earth, and there's only a matter of time. I could see a perceived threat that it's only a matter of time before people begin to question their beliefs. I think the cure to that is being upfront about the potential hermeneutics. You probably shouldn't use that word with young children, but the potential hermeneutics of each passage. Like, we are trying to figure out what God's word is.
So what do you think is like the most misunderstood about evolution?
Taxonomy. That is the one thing that keeps coming up over and over again, because no matter what you do, when somebody asks for proof of evolution, which already is wrong, but they do ask for proof, the proof that they want is an example of a cat turning into a dog, which it's antithetical to taxonomy. The nested hierarchy is what we're talking about. So obviously, if you knew anything about taxonomy, you would know that, especially in an evolutionary sense, there's no way a cat could ever become a dog, or a dog could ever become a cat. They will always be separate.
And a duck won't become a crocodile, or a crocodile a duck, or a
No,
crocoduck.
and which is funny because I did an episode on the Crocoduck Challenge.
Yeah. So I mean, is evolution a theory in crisis?
Evolution is not a theory in crisis. It is still, I mean, maybe on the popular scale, there might be a certain pockets of the country where it's in crisis in terms of its belief. But as far as its use in the scientific circles, it is used to make predictions, and I mean all of Kent Hovind's definitions. I mean, whether it's using the theory of a common descent to predict whether uh, a cancer treatment will perhaps also be effective against an amoeba. That's one way. That's actually been done. Govinda Visvesvara, I've talked about her quite a bit in my show and elsewhere. Um, Deduce that this drug miltefosine would be effective against an amoeba called Naegleria fowleri, simply because there was a presumed relationship that it had to another organism known as Leishmania, which was a euglena. And that one, the difference was that euglena is a flesh destroying euglena, and the amoeba was actually a flesh eating or a brain eating amoeba. And what happened from that is that was applied. That presumption was made, and then that was made in 2007. In 2013, there was a young lady who was 12 years old that was admitted to the hospital after 2 days of being infected with Naegleria fowleri. It had been at that point in time 90%, 97%. There was a 97% mortality rate up until that day, as long as you were treated within 24 hours. After that, it was a 100% mortality rate. And just with that, they ordered miltefosine. The doctor there ordered that based on Govinda Visvesvara's prediction. It was administered, and the young lady actually recovered and actually is, I think she's graduated high school now. I'm sure she has, and gone on to quite a few things. So I hope that answers your question.
We're running a little bit long. I wonder if I maybe could get one more question in, and it's a tough one to end on. So maybe Christine will veto me and add another question. But can you stay with us for a few more minutes, Tony?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Not all of our viewers are still people of faith. Some of them have gone through what people are calling now deconstruction to the point of deconversion. There seems to be a similarity to what you described in How Creationism Taught Me Real Science, when you say that when you looked into creationist arguments, you found that most of them were based on misinformation or exaggeration of the published science. And the thing that was distressing to you at the time was how little willingness there was among creationists to reform or correct their pseudo-scientific views. Now, my question to you is kind of a personal question. That was one of the leading causes that people list for leaving the faith, that they found not just a lack of transparency in the corner they were brought up in, but almost a purposeful bias. Like you said, that was meant to protect whatever worldview they had that they were promoting. I wonder if you could just share with us. I mean, you have a doctorate in divinity. You wanted to be an apologist, or were an apologist and a reverend for a time. What was it for you? Was it your study of apologetics? Was it the demeanor among the people that were providing misinformation? What was it for you that kind of led you away from where you began?
Well, I don't know how far you want me to go with that, but it it was really the reliability of the assertions that were being presented. The ones that were made for the faith were pretty much, in the end, you had to take them on faith. The ones that were made about the science, especially evolution, there was always an accompanying. Here's the experiment. You can try it yourself and see if you get the same result. And I did that a little bit in college, and also in some of the classes I took when I was taking information theory. And it just over time, I just abandoned the things that were not useful anymore. And young Earth creationism, it stopped being useful. I don't know if it was ever useful for anything other than social situations.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see it being useful in social situations. Um,
Yeah.
if that's where you want to be in your social situation, anyway. So, what would be your advice to parents and youth leaders and science communicators and um, people interested in this kind of discussion on science and maybe how it intersects with faith, um, just to go about looking into um, the data or trying to understand more or to communicate from an adult to a younger person? What would be your general advice to people who are maybe not willing to put in as much effort as you have to develop 104 video episodes?
Well,
Um,
they could start with those 104 videos, but
that'd
I'll
be a
let
great
Tony.
place to
Yeah.
start. But I guess in going forward, um, in communicating these topics, what's your advice?
Well, you mentioned this before. I was prepared to talk about this anyway, but there's one common experience that between both young Earth creationists and anyone who accepts evolution, we'll call it I think, well, the thing is, everyone enjoys this. It is a sense of wonder. You mentioned this earlier. It's very important. There are people who see the diversity of life on Earth and they get a sense of wonder at God's creation. I have felt that. I get it and I like it. There's people also who learn a new theory or a scientific discipline, evolution, for example. And in my case, information theory redefined everything for me. And you end up coming to the same feeling of wonder about the diversity of life, and the complexity of the universe, how it works. So it's a human instinct, however, though, to fill in gaps in our knowledge with this solid answer. And the thing is, it's those gaps in our knowledge that what fuels our sense of wonder. And so
Hmm.
I would say our human instinct to explain things, especially without verification, is killing our wonder buzz. It's stilting our feeling that we need to explore the things that we wonder about more deeply. Because not every gap in our knowledge requires an apologetics disclosure. So to those people, I would say, let us have our sense of wonder. It's really okay to be honest that we don't have the answers. It gives you an opportunity to discuss how we go about getting those answers, and that benefits us all.
Yeah, I love that because we don't know it all yet. And
Yeah,
let's not kill the adventure of learning more.
exactly.
Well, I used to know it all. Um,
Till you had kids, right?
So
well, yeah,
it used to be that too.
yeah. I used to be pretty certain that I knew it all,
Hmm.
and now I'm not so much. But yeah, great
Well, I
answer,
think there's a
Tony.
place to say that we don't know it all, but we do know some things with at least some amount of confidence. Maybe not certainty, but with confidence.
Confidence,
Um,
absolutely.
Tony, thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful. We love your channel. We look forward to
Thank
what
you.
you're going to be producing in the future. And
yeah, do you know what where you're gonna go next?
With the next subject,
Yeah, for your
um, uh,
how creationism taught me real science.
I'm going to cover. Well, I should have already done this a while ago, but I'm going to cover ERVs, or
Ooh.
For
Oh,
those of you who
good.
don't know,
Yeah.
endogenous retroviruses. I need to cover that. I also need to cover more about junk DNA and specifically orphan genes. And so that's a little bit of it. I've got a few other ones in geology that I want to cover because I keep seeing these certain arguments show up that and some of them, the reason I haven't covered them yet is because I couldn't believe somebody was actually making them, but they're popular. They've become popular arguments. So I've got a few that I just have to cover. They're hopefully not going to be the few of them. I'm trying to keep the length down, but I'm trying to keep them all under 10 minutes and hopefully under 5 minutes. But yeah, I've got a few things coming in.
Oh, that's great. Well, this happens to be our third anniversary of our show.
No kidding.
We started 3 years ago on the Sunday of Memorial Weekend with Dennis Venema. So,
Wow.
um,
Wow.
yeah, really
And you
exciting
didn't
to
get
have
me
you here
anything.
this year.
I
You didn't give me anything either. So maybe we could consider this the kickoff of season 3.
Outstanding.
Well, I
Yeah.
really like what
Yes.
you guys are doing. I hope you guys continue doing this because the platform you give people, it's something that I was considering doing myself, but why would I do it now that you're doing it better than I ever could have? This
Oh,
Thank
platform to
you.
give people that want to have a civil discourse, give them their chance to talk, and I really like what you do, and I hope you continue doing it for a long time.
oh, thank you,
Well, thank
Tony.
you.
Yeah.
See, this is my way of being lazier than you are. So you have
Hmm.
to do all
Oh,
the work, and then we just let you talk about it.
Mm-hmm. We do
well,
have
thank you.
some. We do have some great shows coming up, folks. We have the Vatican astronomer Guy Consoli. I can't say your last name. Um,
Pennsylvania, I think it is.
Consolmania.
The,
Um,
the
we're gonna have
director of the Vatican Observatory.
a date with Mary
Yeah.
Schweitzer coming up, and others. So please tune in when you see us. All right. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you.